Do you know what the gospel is? A friend of mine some years back asked a bunch of Christians this question. He just basically said, give me the gospel in 30 seconds. Most people struggle to really come up with what the actual gospel is. Once you understand it, it is so incredibly simple that it almost feels like you must be missing something. It's too basic, it's too simple, it's too easy perhaps. Many people would say that. One of the things that people often forgot was the gospel is the life, the death, and the burial of Jesus. He lived the life that we ought to have lived, and he died the death that we should have died. And many people stopped there. They forgot about the idea that Jesus also raised from the dead, and he ascended up into heaven, and he sent his Spirit down to us. This is the good news. The gospel means good news, and we should know it very, very crisply and clearly. We should be able to succinctly and astutely tell people what the good news is, because Christianity is not about a method of living. It's not a system of or mode of behavior. It is not a list of rules to follow. It is a message that is to be declared. It is something you can tell someone, and if they respond correctly, they will immediately be saved. It is like no other religion. In many other religions, they hope that one day they'll be saved. They hope that perhaps one day their life and their abilities will measure up to what they think God is looking for from them. Or they might hope that one day God will look down on them in the proper amount of mercy and kindness and just let go the things that they have done wrong. Only in Christianity, only with the deliverance of the gospel, can you know for certain that you are immediately and once and for all forgiven based on the gospel. Because it is this, 1 Corinthians 15:1. Moreover, brethren, I declare unto you the gospel. Paul is going to give us the most concise, clear, simple form of the gospel that there is. I declare unto you the gospel which I preached unto you, which ye also have received, and wherein ye stand. So it's something that you can receive of a messenger, and then you can stand in that message. You can be resolved to not be moved from it. Many times you're encouraged throughout the New Testament, Paul's writings in particular, where he says, be not moved away from the hope of the gospel. So what is the gospel? I preached it to you, I delivered it to you, you received it, and you're currently standing in it. By the which also ye are saved. You are currently saved right now because of the gospel. How? What do we need to do in order to be saved? If ye keep in memory what I preached unto you, unless ye have believed in vain. So now we know that the message is something that can be delivered through a messenger. It can be received, and it can be stood in. And then he says, and you have to remember it. You have to keep it in memory as long as you live. You continue to walk in light of it. This is why I titled my podcast, my YouTube channel, In Light of the Gospel. In light of the gospel, we live, we work, we have our being. We do all that we do in light of what he's done for us. So if you've received this message, and you'll hear the message in a moment, and if you stand in it, and if you keep it in memory, you are saved. You are saved currently. Verse 3, for I delivered unto you first of all that which I also received. So Paul received this message, and now he delivered it to the Corinthians, and now I'm delivering it to you. I received this message. How that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures. So he went back to the Old Testament Scriptures. You look at Psalm 22, look at Isaiah 53, two of the very popular ones. For instance, there's many other messianic psalms and messianic prophecies throughout the Old Testament. But according to the Old Testament Scriptures, Christ had to die. He was bruised for our iniquities. He was wounded for our transgressions. The chastisement of our peace was upon him. By his stripes we are healed. That's the gospel. That's part of the gospel. So he died for our sins according to the Scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he rose again the third day according to the Scriptures. That's it. That is the good news. And I've seen that the understanding of that message transform lives immediately. Upon receiving that message and believing it and then standing in it. So you can intellectually know those truths. Well, I've already always known that Jesus died for my sins. I've already always known that Jesus raised from the dead. And you might never even question the validity of it. You might never be a critic of it, and yet you're not standing in it. You're not keeping it in memory. You're not living in light of it. But if you believe that message, as simple as it is, and I think the simpler you can keep it when you're delivering it to people, the better. If you believe that message and walk in it and live in it and stand in it and keep it in memory, then you are saved once and for all. There's nothing else left for you to do. Whenever you fail, whenever you come short, you come back to it. You recognize that truth again and again and again. So I know this is fundamental, rudimentary type of stuff that pretty much all of you probably to some degree know. And yet when people get asked the question, what is the gospel? They often can't tell you the answer. It is Jesus' life. It is the fact that he lived 100% perfectly and he pleased God in every way. And then when he could have ascended up into heaven to take his rightful place in heaven, he rather condescended to men of low estate, like we are called to now do, and he took upon himself the form of a servant, and he became obedient unto death, even the death of the cross, so that he could suffer for our sins and take them down into the grave. And then he came back out of that grave with no sin on him. None of your sin was remaining on him when he came back out. He was received up into heaven as the perfect, sinless, spotless Son of God that he is, and you and I enter into that reality. Upon hearing the message of Jesus' death, burial, resurrection, and ascension into heaven, you are made a participant in that truth. Meaning, when you believe the message, God baptizes you by his Spirit into the body of Jesus, so that just as Christ was raised up from the dead, you also were raised up from the dead. Just as Christ was crucified, you also were crucified. And so in this one message of Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection, as simple as it is, there's a whole complex system of how God chose before the foundations of the earth to save humanity. It is simple, it is basic, and that's often what throws people off. And it's what makes us try to think more deeply. Well, shouldn't I live a certain way? Shouldn't I respond in a certain way of thinking? Shouldn't I change my lifestyle? Those are not the gospel. Those may be in response to the gospel, but the gospel is simply this. Jesus died according to the scriptures, and he was buried, and he was raised again the third day according to the scriptures. This is the gospel of our salvation.